It happens to everyone. I call Rona Mackay to be followed by John Finney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today is the culmination of many hours of evidence-taking, report reading and outreach visits to prepare for Stage 1 of the Offensive Behaviour at Football and Threatening Communications Scotland Repeal Bill. I too would like to thank the clerks for all their hard work and organisation. As always, it was first class. I'd also like to thank the many witnesses that took the time to give evidence in front of the Justice Committee. Clearly, this is a very contentious issue which has roused passionate opposition among some football fans, and I respect that. Having been born in Glasgow and growing up in the west of Scotland, I was always aware of the poisonous sectarian divides which have historically been the scourge of Scotland. In 2005, then Labour First Minister Jack McConnell said, "For far too long, bigoted sectarian behaviour has been a scar on Scottish life. Bigoted sectarian attitudes have no place in a 21st century Scotland." Now, I know he wasn't just saying sectarian attitudes were on display at football matches, but no one, not even our many passionate witnesses, could deny that sectarian behaviour did and does take place at football matches. I was at an Old Firm match last year as part of a Justice Committee evidence-taking visit and heard it for myself. This leads into the discussion... Yes.
Liam Kerr.
I thank the member for taking the intervention. Well, George Adam was clear on that point that the Act has failed, and the Black and Ethnic Minority Infrastructure in Scotland group have also said the Act fails to tackle hate crime. Does the member support both of those views?
Rona Mackay.
I think the Act acknowledges that we have a huge problem, and to repeal it would be sending out entirely the wrong message. This leads into the discussion, how do we define sectarianism, which is one of the recommendations made by the committee in the Stage 1 report, and something the government will consider should the bill progress to Stage 2. Presiding Officer, like my colleagues, I certainly don't believe this legislation is perfect by any means. However, I don't believe outright repeal with nothing to replace it is the answer for several reasons, which I'll go on to outline. I believe the bill could be amended to address the issues in Section 1, which most repeal supporters object to. Of course, it would be for government to instruct amendments, but perhaps the Act could be extended to cover religious marches or gatherings where sectarian behaviour sometimes occurs, or sectarian behaviour happening at other events, as described by Mary Fee. I just wanted to make a bit of progress, thanks. With careful consideration of the objections received, I'm confident that a compromise could be achieved to avoid total repeal. I listened to James Kelly on television last night saying he'd work with the government and others on alternative proposals, and I would hope that he could do that on amendments to this existing bill. Presiding Officer, my main reason for not supporting the total repeal of this Act is that, as others have said, I believe it will send out the wrong message to society. We've taken bold steps to show that Scotland is not living in the past, and to repeal the Act in its entirety would, in my opinion, be a retrograde step. Furthermore, and crucially, the committee heard heartfelt evidence from Stonewall Scotland, Victim Support Scotland, the Equality Network, the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities and other churches, and the Scottish Women's Convention that they did not support repeal because the Act comforted them and gave them a feeling of safety. I really don't think you can ignore evidence from respected bodies like that. Presiding Officer, we all know that the majority of football fans go to a match to watch the game and cheer on their team, and so this Act doesn't really concern them. I've asked friends who I know attend football regularly, and all bar one were indifferent to whether the Act was there or not. So it's a vocal minority who oppose this Act, and that's their right to do so. Presiding Officer, we've heard a lot about Section 6 of the bill, and it's so important, and I believe there would be a gap in the law if that was thrown out with this bill. And my colleague Marie Goujon articulately outlined examples of that. Of course, there were divided opinions about that during evidence-taking, but again, the perception of throwing out a bill which condemns threatening communications, those very words, would send out a problematic message from this Parliament. In the committee's questionnaire to secondary schools, almost 66% of pupils said they had experienced online offensive behaviour, and this is a critical problem today. As has been said by the Minister and others, if this repeal bill goes through today, I hope there will be enough time to plug the holes in legislation which would occur following immediate repeal. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I urge the Chamber not to kill this bill, but to amend it to send out the strong message that Scotland has moved on and intolerant attitudes have been consigned to history. Thank you.
Thank you very much.